The wind howled across the plains like a warning from the earth itself. Dust rolled against the barn walls, and the sky burned orange as the sun slipped low, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Before this story begins, take a second. Subscribe to this channel and share this story with someone who loves powerful, unforgettable tales. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. The cowboy didn't notice the figure at first. He was busy shoveling grain, hands cracked and bleeding, shoulders bent from years of surviving alone. His name was Elias Crow, a man forgotten by towns and written off by fate. When he finally looked up, the boy was already inside the barn, standing barefoot on frozen dirt, ribs showing through torn skin, eyes hollow with hunger and fear. The boy didn't speak. He just stared. Elias knew starvation when he saw it. He'd lived it once, long ago, after the war took everything except his breath. Without thinking, he dropped the shovel, grabbed a slab of dried meat, and held it out slowly, the way you approach a wounded animal. The boy flinched, but then the smell won. He ate like he hadn't seen food in days, hands shaking, tears streaking dirt down his cheeks. Only after the boy finished did Elias see the markings on his arms. Tribal markings, not random, not small. This wasn't just a runaway child. This was a message. That night, Elias gave him water, wrapped him in a blanket, and let him sleep near the fire. He never asked his name. Some things didn't need asking. When dawn came, the boy was gone. Elias thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. Before noon, the ground began to tremble. He stepped outside his barn and froze. Across the field, stretching from fence line to horizon, stood 200 native warriors, silent, mounted, painted for war, spears upright, eyes locked on him. Not one moved. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm tears the sky apart. Elias didn't run. He didn't grab his rifle. He just stood there, heart pounding, knowing deep in his bones that whatever he'd done yesterday had reached something far older and far more powerful than him. The lead warrior rode forward. His face was weathered like stone, eyes sharp as knives. He raised one hand. The others remained perfectly still. The warrior dismounted and walked toward Elias alone. "You fed my son," he said. "No threat, no anger, just truth." Elias swallowed. He was starving. The warrior studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Many men see hunger. Few answer it. Behind him, the warriors lowered their weapons. Not in surrender, but in recognition. What Elias didn't know was that the boy he fed was the last living heir of a tribe pushed to extinction by broken treaties and bloodshed. The warriors outside his barn weren't invaders. They were survivors. And Elias had unknowingly stepped into the center of their final stand. Word spread fast. Too fast. By nightfall, riders from the town gathered at the edge of Elias's land, rifles loaded, fear poisoning their judgment. They saw warriors and thought massacre. They didn't see honor. They didn't see gratitude. The sheriff arrived with threats on his lips. The tribal leader stepped forward again, placing himself between Elias and the guns. "This land holds no war today," he said, "but if blood is demanded, ours will not be given quietly." Elias stepped forward then, a single man against history. "Nobody dies here," he said. "Not today." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. What happened next became legend. The warriors turned, not away but inward, forming a circle around Elias's barn. Not to attack, to protect. 200 lives standing between one man and death because he chose mercy when cruelty was easier. At sunrise they were gone. No tracks, no sound, only a symbol carved into the barn door, a mark of eternal protection. Years passed. Elias never left that land. No thief crossed it. No fire touched it. No storm broke it. Travelers spoke of a barn no evil would approach. And when Elias died, they buried him facing the sunrise just beyond the fence line, under a stone marked with both a cross and a tribal sign, proof that kindness outlives blood and mercy echoes louder than war. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel. Share it with your friends. Stories like this deserve to live on. The wind came first, low and restless, sliding across the plains like it had something to say but didn't trust the world enough to say it out loud. It rattled the broken boards of the barn, carried dust into every crack, and howled through the tall grass as if the land itself remembered pain. This was a place the maps barely bothered to name, a stretch of earth forgotten by towns, railroads, and mercy alike. And standing at the heart of it was a man who had learned how to survive being forgotten. Elias Crow had lived on this land for nearly 20 years, though lived might have been too generous a word. He endured it. Every morning he woke before the sun, his joints screaming like rusted hinges, his hands already aching before the work even began. His barn leaned slightly to the east, scarred by old storms and older neglect. The fence posts were crooked, patched together with wire and stubbornness. Nothing about the place looked strong, but it had never fallen. Neither had Elias. He shoveled grain that afternoon with the same rhythm he'd used for years, each motion practiced, each breath measured. His back burned, but he didn't slow. Pain had long ago stopped being something he fought. It was just there, like the wind, ever-present, unarguable. The world had taken enough from him that he didn't believe in luck anymore, or kindness, or signs. That's why he didn't notice the boy at first. The sound came softly, a shuffle, almost swallowed by the wind. Elias paused mid-motion, shovel half raised. His eyes lifted slowly, scanning the shadows inside the barn. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then the boy stepped forward into the light. He couldn't have been more than 12, 13 at most. His hair hung in dark, tangled strands over his face. His clothes were torn beyond repair, barely holding together over a body that was far too thin. His feet were bare, skin cracked and bleeding from cold and distance, but it was his eyes that stopped Elias's breath. They weren't afraid. They were empty. That kind of emptiness didn't come from fear alone. It came from hunger, from exhaustion so deep it burned away hope. Elias had seen it once before, in his own reflection years ago when the war ended and left him with nothing but memories and scars that never quite healed. The boy didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He just stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was ready to bolt the second Elias raised his voice. Elias set the shovel down slowly. The sound of metal against dirt felt loud in the silence. He wiped his hands on his pants, then reached into a crate near the wall. Inside was his food for the week: salted meat, dried hard by time, rationed carefully because winter had already begun sharpening its teeth. He hesitated for half a second. Then he grabbed the meat and held it out. The boy flinched at first, eyes narrowing. Muss. Please tightening like a trapped animal's. But then the smell reached him. Elias saw it in the way the boy's nostrils flared, the way his hands trembled. Hunger won. He crossed the distance in 2 steps and tore into the food with a desperation that made Elias's chest tighten. He ate fast, painfully fast, chewing like he was afraid someone might take it away. Tears streamed down his face, carving clean lines through the dirt and grime. Elias turned away. There were some moments a man didn't deserve to watch. When the boy finished, he sank to the ground, breathing hard, hands clutching his stomach, like he didn't trust the pain to stop. Elias brought him water, crouching low, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. The boy drank deeply, spilling half of it down his chin. That's when Elias noticed the markings, dark lines inked into the boy's arms, running from shoulder to wrist in patterns too precise to be random. Symbols layered with meaning, old meaning. Elias had seen drawings like that once, carved into stone near a dried riverbed far south of here. These weren't decorations. They were identity. The boy pulled his arms in instinctively, realizing he'd been seen. His eyes finally met Elias's again. There was fear there now, not of hunger, but of recognition. "It's all right," Elias said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." The boy didn't answer. Elias wrapped a blanket around him, thick and worn, smelling faintly of hay and smoke. The boy stiffened, then slowly relaxed. Exhaustion claimed him right there on the barn floor, his body folding in on itself like it had finally been given permission to stop fighting. That night, Elias sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and crackle, listening to the wind outside. He didn't sleep much. He rarely did. But this night was different. Something felt unsettled, like the land was waiting. At dawn, the boy was gone. No sound, no tracks, nothing but the empty blanket folded neatly by the fire. Elias stared at the spot for a long time. He told himself the boy was just passing through, told himself it didn't matter. told himself it was none of his business. But deep down, something old and instinctive stirred, a sense that kindness, once given, doesn't disappear quietly. The morning passed slowly. Too slowly. Near midday, the horses began to act strange, snorting, stamping, refusing to settle. Then the ground began to vibrate, not violently, but steadily, like a distant heartbeat growing louder. Elias stepped out of the barn. The horizon was alive. They stood in perfect silence, 200 native warriors mounted on horses, stretching across the plains like a living wall. Their faces were painted with symbols of war and honor. Spears glinted in the sun. Bows rested easily in practiced hands. Not one spoke. Not one moved. They were not lost. They were not confused. They were there for him. Elias felt his heart hammer against his ribs, but his feet stayed planted. Running wouldn't save him. Guns wouldn't save him. He knew that. A man who had survived battle recognized when it had already arrived. One rider moved forward. He dismounted with calm authority, every step measured, eyes locked on Elias. His face was carved by years of survival, his presence heavy with command. He stopped a few feet away and spoke in a voice that carried without shouting, "You fed my son." The words landed harder than any threat. Elias nodded once. He was starving. The man studied him for a long moment. Then he placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly. "Among my people," he said, "a man who feeds the starving becomes family." Behind him, 200 warriors lowered their weapons in unison, and in that moment, Elias Crow realized his life. Quiet, broken, forgot. Ben had just collided with something far greater than himself. If you're feeling this story, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who loves powerful, unforgettable stories. This is only the beginning. When you're ready, I will continue with Chapter 2, where the town reacts, fear turns to violence, and Elias is forced to choose between survival and honor. The silence didn't break when the warriors lowered their weapons. It thickened. It pressed down on the land until even the wind seemed afraid to move. Elias stood there, boots planted in the dirt of his own yard, staring at a truth he never could have imagined. 200 lives bound to a single simple act of mercy. The leader turned slightly and spoke in his own tongue. The sound of it rolled across the field like distant thunder, low and deliberate. The warriors listened without shifting in their saddles. When he finished, several dismounted, moving with disciplined calm, forming a loose perimeter around the barn, not threatening, not aggressive, but unmistakably protective. Elias felt something twist in his chest. Protection wasn't something he was used to. Not since the war. Not since everyone he depended on learned how easily men could disappear. "You should go," Elias said quietly, though he wasn't sure who he was saying it to, the leader, the warriors, or fate itself. "The town won't see this the way you do." The leader's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in understanding. "We know the town," he replied. "We have always known it." By late afternoon, the first riders appeared on the ridge. Town men, farmers, ranch hands, rifles slung over shoulders, fear riding beside them. Word had traveled fast, too fast. Someone had seen the warriors. Someone had panicked. Panic, Elias knew, was more dangerous than hunger or cold. The sheriff came last, his horse lathered with sweat, his jaw set tight. He reined in hard when he saw the formation around the barn. "Elias," he called, trying to sound calm and failing. "Step away from them." Elias didn't move. "These people are armed," the sheriff continued. "This is a threat to the town." The leader stepped forward again, placing himself deliberately between Elias and the rifles now being raised behind the sheriff. "This land holds no war today," he said evenly. "We came to honor a debt." The sheriff laughed, sharp and nervous. "That's not how it looks." Elias felt the old war instincts stir, the ones that told him exactly how fast a gun could be raised, how quickly a life could end. He stepped forward, hands empty, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "Nobody fires," he said. "Not today." The sheriff stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You don't get to decide that." Elias met his gaze. "I already did." A breeze swept across the field, tugging at coats, lifting dust. For a heartbeat, everything balanced on the edge of disaster. Then something extraordinary happened. The warriors began to sing. It was low at first, almost felt rather than heard, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the ground. The horses stilled. The men with rifles hesitated, uncertainty cracking through their fear. The song wasn't a challenge, it wasn't a threat. It was remembrance. The leader lifted his voice last, the melody swelling until the air itself seemed to listen. Elias didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Loss, survival, honor. Debt repaid not with blood but with guardianship. Slowly, one by one, the rifles lowered. The sheriff swallowed hard. He had come expecting a standoff, maybe even a massacre. What he saw instead was something he couldn't name, and couldn't fight. "This ends now," the leader said when the song faded. "We leave at sunrise. Until then, this man stands under our protection." No one argued. That night, fires burned softly across the field. The warriors kept watch, silent sentinels beneath the stars. Elias sat outside his barn, wrapped in a coat that smelled of smoke and hay, listening to the land breathe. The leader sat beside him without speaking for a long time. "My son will live because of you," he said finally, "and so will our memory." Elias stared out at the darkness. "I didn't do it for memory." The leader nodded. "That is why it matters." At dawn they were gone, no tracks, no sound. Just the empty field and a symbol carved into the barn door, an ancient mark, deep and deliberate, promising protection that didn't fade with time. The town never spoke of that day openly, but no harm ever came to Elias's land again. Thieves turned away without knowing why. Storms broke before reaching the fence. Travelers felt it too, a weight in the air, a warning without words. Years later, when Elias was laid to rest beneath the rising sun, they carved that same symbol into his stone beside his name. Proof that kindness once given never truly leaves. If this chapter held you, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel and share this story with your friends. The final chapter will reveal the legacy that followed and why this story was never meant to be forgotten.